All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So we yesterday had done وَلَهُ مَا سَكَنَ فِي اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ, and we went to Tafseer al-Qurtubi in details. In regards to the tafsir, we said قُلْ إِنِّي أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أَكُونَ أَوَّلَ مَنْ أَسْلَمَ. We talked about the word al-Islam. We talked about what that means. We also talked about وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. We talked about what al-Tahir ibn Ashur had mentioned in regards to the reasons why we were not permitted to display certain, at least, appearances, and in order to make sure that we are not feeling a part of such groups. So we talked about that. Sister Martina, you wanted to say something, dear.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Walaikum
How are you?
salam. Very good,
I,
alhamdulillah.
I invited my friend. She could not sign in. That's why I was wondering. I called Noora. I think she couldn't.
Okay, Noura will take care of it, inshallah.
Okay.
Um, قل إني أخاف إن عصيت ربي, and we talked about العصيان, we talked about disobedience, and we said that in general, disobedience, العصيان, is usually in legislature, but in this context, it's in legislature and also in faith as well, because within this context, it was actually talking about mainly in belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why إني أخاف إن عصيت ربي, I fear that if I disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is in believing the Lord Almighty. And that's a very important wording right here, because when we're speaking about disbelief or disobedience, that part of the obedience is, let's say, is not exclusive only to legislature, but part of it is also inclusive in including faith in how you relate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's to let us know when we speak about deen, deen is not only in faith, but deen is also in legislature as well. مَن يُصْرَفْ عَنْهُ يَوْمَئِذٍ فَقَدْ رَحِمَهُ. We talked about the different قراءات, مَن يصرف عنه and مَن يُصْرَفْ عنه, in other words, a passive voice. We talked about that. We also talked about وَذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْمُبِينُ, because it's very common that in Lugha Arabiya we could use the word faza to basically be optimistic in being successful, in basically being safe, etc. But this ayah had included al-mubin to let us know that we're not talking about success in a form of us being optimistic about it, but we're actually talking about real success and certainly real victory. And إِن يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ وَإِن يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُوَ. We talked about pricking with different harm. We talked about theodicy. We mentioned in different details how theodicy, or at least how the different evil is basically evolving, that we're being held accountable. In other words, we're being tested, and that evil is not something that we can attribute to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And three, we talked about that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not create absolute evil, but may result in some harm that we as human beings can see, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not create absolute evil. And of course, evil or harm is relative. Human beings can create absolute evil, but not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, we talked about some of that, and we also talked about فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُوَ. We talked about al-kashf. We talked about at least al-kashf within this context, and how harm leads to anxiety, leads to the inability to basically focus on different, one decision making, and perhaps affecting our cognitive skills, affecting our capability in processing ideas, etc. And we said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُ, as an indication that when you are going through these types of anxieties, just know that the only one that would be capable of uplifting such anxiety is basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, uplifting the anxiety and the implications of anxiety. Why are we talking about the implications of anxiety? Because remember the part in the ayah when Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam said, إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. أشكو بثي, البث is different than الحزن, because al-bath is basically the sorrow, the sadness that may result as not as a direct relationship with whatever trauma that happened, but as an indirect trauma, as an indirect relationship. So for example, a woman going through a divorce, as a result of her divorce, probably that she had so much hope, invested so much in her marriage, and then this marriage basically breaks in front of her own eyes. The man probably took all her money and basically had said so many evil things about her, gaslighting and all of that. And then as a result of all that she's going through, probably maybe court and all of that, that resulted in al-huzn. Noura, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, because a lot of people, they say, I made istikhara and this person, it turned out to be a divorce or whatever. But,
Okay.
because of the qadr, uh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted that person to go through that. And we had mentioned in the tafsir previously that not as a punishment, but to make this person a better person, right?
So when we think of good, we usually think of complete good, but we may not recognize that some of what could be seeming as harm is actually containing good within it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not decree absolute evil. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not decree absolute evil. So you made istikhara. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did inshallah answer your dua, but at the same time, you always have to look on the side where that is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had kept within his wisdom to why did you go through this? You may not know all the details, but what Allah
yeah,
subhanahu wa
that's
ta'ala
true.
to look into is that, well, I need to be optimistic. لعله خير. This could be for the good. I'm not sure where this is taking me. And then you keep up putting in this optimism that inshallah for a good wisdom there's going to be something after. Khara is going to bring you to this it's telling me that my internet connection is not too good, so let me fix that piece
Yeah,
of it.
just like in Surah
Okay, here we go.
Al-Asr,
Right.
after the hardship comes ease.
Absolutely. So I would like to say that thinking that if I would make Salat al-Istikhara, that everything is just supposed to be good, or at least good in your own terms, that's problematic. That's a misunderstanding of Salat al-Istikhara. Salat al-Istikhara within it has the answer to what Istikhara is. If we look at Dua al-Istikhara, Allahumma inni astakhiruka bi'ilmik wa astaqdiruka biqudrak قدرتك وأسألك من فضلك العظيم فأنت تقدر ولا أقدر وأنت تعلم ولا أعلم وأنت علام الغيوب اللهم إن كنت تعلم أن هذا الأمر. Here goes the point and the main theme about dua al-istikhara. When you make dua al-istikhara, Ya Allah, I seek in your ilm, for you know and I don't know, and I seek in your power and in your potentials, for you have it and I don't, to make this the best for me. Okay? أستخيرك وأستقدر فأنت تعلم ولا أعلم, for you know and I don't know. And that's the key thing. For you know and I don't know. اللهم إن كنت تعلم أن هذا الأمر, if you know that this matter is good for me, for my faith, for my hereafter, then make it happen. If you know this is that this is evil for me, my faith, my hereafter, then keep it away from me and bring me what is good. So looking at this dua, within it, you would actually find that answer that when you make dua al-istikhara, you're actually praying for what is good, but not necessarily your terms of what is good. Okay, so you could think that my term for what is good is that this would be a successful marriage, this man would turn out to be a very good man, etc. But what you might not realize is that you're actually making the dua for what is good in this dunya and for what is good in the hereafter. You don't know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might actually put you through hardships because He wants you to probably get into another stage of empowerment. Just keep that one in mind, because just like when we looked at this hadith, واعلم أن الصبر على ما تكره خيرا كثيرا, and know that in having patience on what you may hate, that there is a lot of good that comes out of it. So we usually think that only successful situations are going to bring us into basically happy ending, but that's not always the case. We would go through probably hardship during school, maybe studying and all of that effort that we might be going through. We might not realize that the effort and the hardship invested actually brings in empowerment. So just keep that one in mind. I'll just give an example on so many different, whether we're speaking about Sahaba, probably going through certain hardship, when Salama, when her husband had died and she was in complete distress, and the Prophet ﷺ taught her to say, Allahumma ajirni fi musibati wa akhluf li khayran minha. Ya Allah, bring me the best to the calamity that I'm going through and bring me something better than it. She said, I thought to myself, who could be better than my own husband? Who could at all, and in any shape or form, be in any way better than my loss? And she said, I never had expected that I would be married to the Prophet himself. And of course, certainly, we could see that Sayyidah Aisha, when she was accused in that slander, when she was accused of having an affair with Safwan ibn al-Mu'attal, she was just in complete distress and not recognizing that there was an ayah that was coming her way, revealing her innocence for all the years to come. Ustaz Umayya, you wanted to say something, dear.
Inshallah, Bismillah. For Salama, can we understand what the Prophet ﷺ told her to say, Allahumma ajurni fi musibati wa akhluf li al-khayra minha, that I get the best thing from it, which is one of it is like as-sabr, al-khayr from this. Can we understand it in this way?
So al-khayr is a comprehensive word, so you could see that this is istighraqiyya. In Lugha Arabiya, istighraqiyya simply means it's an inclusive term. So when we make the dua, وَخْلُفْ لِي خَيْرًا مِنْهَا, you could see it's not al-khayr, but it's khayran. In other words, it's nakira, and that's one way of making something that is am. Al-nakira tufid al-umum. So in other words, we're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're making this dua to bring me what is good. What is good? It could be in probably empowerment, psychological psychologically. It could be empowerment, maybe financially. It could be empowerment socially. It could be empowerment to probably get me stronger, to be able to face different calamities, different challenges, etc. So we're not necessarily making our dua exclusive to our term of what type of good will result as basically a result of this calamity that we're going through. So we're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring me what is good, and not based on my terms, but based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's terms.
Right, this is what I mean, but not only it's the better than it. Not
Right. So it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm asking for a better kind of a husband, for
right,
example.
right.
Okay, because
Jazakallah.
that's on your terms.
Barakallah.
Because that would be based on our terms that, yeah, well, أخلف لي خيرا منها. If let's say you lost a job, you would be making this dua on your terms that I want a better job that's probably paying me a better, maybe a better income, or probably giving me better opportunities, etc. That you would think of it as only within money. But when you say khayran minha, you're making it inclusive, and that it could be not necessarily wealth, but it could probably be something maybe socially, psychologically. Maybe it's getting you stronger in your faith. And that's what we would get if you were to look at another ayah that I could think of right now, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ قُتِلَ مَظْلُومًا فَقَدْ جَعَلْنَا لِوَلِيِّهِ سُلْطَانًا فَلَا يُسْرِفْ فِي الْقَتْلِ. Whoever was killed in an abusive manner, then we are to give, and we will give his guardians sultana. I want you to look at the word sultana, because what the word sultana, again, just like khayran minha, it was actually not identified with an al. So in other words, it is nakira, and not identifying it. When you say sultana, it basically made it more inclusive to, and certainly this inclusivity of it. In other words, it's not specified. It's not specified to what kind of sultan. It didn't specify that we're going to get you powered and we're going to empower you, then you're going to be able to kill one of them, for example. It didn't say that. It basically just left it as sultana. Who knows? It could be that you're going to be getting a compensation with probably for the loss of your loved one, probably a compensation maybe of some kind of a discovery, some kind of a knowledge, some kind of maybe social status. Maybe in the future, you'll probably get maybe financial compensation.
Yeah, or solution.
Or just different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will empower you with as a compensation. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wanting us not to think that good is based on our terms of good. But some of the different answers to your dua could be based on the terms that He knows would be better for you than that particular term. We would usually think, well, I would want a compensation for a bad husband, a better husband. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, no, marriage could not be a thing for you after all. Marriage is probably not something that suits you. Maybe what suits you is to probably be in a position, maybe in teaching, maybe in a position, probably in giving advice to people, maybe in a position to probably be a CEO of some company. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what potentials He's going to give you and what positions suit you better. Not
But
everybody is to be happier based on the terms that they would think, well, that's what would make me happy.
but Salam understood it in this way, who could be
Well, she understood it in this
Salama.
way, but the dua itself is not exclusive to a particular way. So that's why when we make the dua, try using the duas that are ma'thur. What is ma'thur? Meaning the way that the Prophet ﷺ had done them, in the quoting that the Prophet ﷺ had done it in, because the quoting would basically be what is called in Lughah Arabiya jami' mani'. Jami' meaning that it would be more comprehensive. It would be one in short terms, in comprehensive words, and certainly when it's jami' mana, it's basically including what is best for you without being specific, and at the same time, it gives the space for you to recognize different potentials and not necessarily continue in the search based on your terms. Recognize that there are different things that you need to explore and navigate about yourself, and you need to explore and navigate about this world. In other words, be a person that's living in optimism that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you different potentials. You have to navigate them, given you a compensation, and that way you would not be, let's say, caging yourself and confining yourself that I'm just in search probably of a new husband or probably in search of a new paying job. I made the dua. And because if you were to confine yourself within this area, then that's going to blind you from seeing other areas. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted you to be one, alert, with open eyes, with having that wisdom that you're basically ready to embrace whatever good that comes to you, and you won't reject the good that comes to you. So that many times, if we're just so focused that, no, I made a dua for a new husband, and that's the dua that I'm looking for to be answered, and there could be other potentials, other rizq coming at you, but you're rejecting it because your brain is so fixated that, no, I'm supposed to be looking within this area, within this angle.
Right.
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted you, no, I want you to open arms. I want you to open your eyes, and I want you to be aware and be awake whenever good comes at you. Don't necessarily just think that, no, it's supposed to be from this door. There could be other doors of khair. That's all that matters.
Yeah, that's very true. SubhanAllah.
There could be other doors of khair. Maybe marriage is not your thing. Maybe education is not your thing. We don't always have to get a degree, a college degree. Maybe talab al-ilm is not your thing. Maybe you're a person that is a giver. You just like to help seniors, like helping young children. Maybe you are a person that is coming in with different potentials. You don't have to close the doors and thinking that, no, that's it. This is what I know how to do, and this is what I want to be able to do.
جزيتي خيرا ما شاء الله.
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wanting us to be with open arms and not with closed eyes and just being fixated towards one angle, but recognize that the doors of khair are many.
And isn't that just submitting to the
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The doors of khair are many. Not everyone is, some people are good at being in business, and right? They're just good at making money and making business, and they can contribute for gems of light. They can contribute for khair. But when it comes to studying, when it comes to memorizing, that's just not something they're good at. It can happen. So recognize your potentials, invest with your potentials in a way that brings al-khair for you. Okay, so وَأَنَّ الْفَرَجَ مَعَ الْكَرْبِ, and every single calamity basically comes with the eases that would open the streams of good without you realizing. This is where we left off at. وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ وَهُوَ الْحَكِيمُ الْخَبِيرُ. Now, of course, when we look at this ayah, وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ, it's actually a very scary word, because الْقَاهِرُ قَاهَرَ. And when is it coming after? It's coming after وَإِن يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ. If the Lord Almighty pricks you with certain harm, then no one is capable of uplifting it, removing the implications of it except the Lord Almighty. And then it says, وهو القاهر فوق عباده, that he is the one that overcomes his own servants. But let's look into the word qahara. Okay, the word qahara is the root for the word qahir. Al-Qahir is one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we usually think of Al-Qahir as an evil thing. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not evil. So when you look at Al-Qahir, it's usually, okay, coming with the connotation that he is the one to make you recognize that you are not the one in control of your matters, and that he is the ultimate power. That's Al-Qahir, that he is the ultimate power, and that's what Al-Ghalaba means. He's capable of overcoming your choices, overcoming your attempts to probably maybe get to a certain conclusion or a certain situation or whatever it is, but then you would think that you're in control of all your choices, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes in to let you know that you don't control al-qadar. You don't control the decree. You don't control the way the world functions. And فوق عباده, he's beyond his own servants. When you look at the word فوق, when you look at the word فوق, it basically is to mean on top of everything, but this isn't to physically mean on top, although it can mean physically on top, but فوق عباده is more metaphorical, but it could also be literal. If we were to say fawqa, on top, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anyways told us that he is fi sama, that he's in the heavens. Is that fawqa? Is that meaning on top, meaning physically on top? That he's beyond us physically? Or are we talking about fawqa metaphorically, meaning that he is beyond us metaphorically, and therefore anything that we might probably invest in, he's the one that actually controls all our matters. So wait a minute. Are we controlled, or are we given the free will? Okay. Are we controlled, or are we given the free will? Because if we are to take this ayah, that means we don't have free will. If we were to just leave it at that, okay, then we don't have free will. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given us other ayat for us to understand the context of this ayah, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ, meaning that you could be making the choices, but the Lord Almighty's power and the Lord Almighty's will overcomes your will. So now we understand the word qahara actually means to put the person in dhillah, in a submissive situation, in a way where they would have no control and no power and feel that they have nothing to do but submit to the situation. Okay, so this is that connotation that the word al-qahir comes with. Okay, but of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we say وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ, within this context, within the context of this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that whether it's harm or whether it's good, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that actually controls all the different matters that surround you, and you as a human being, you would only be capable of using at least your power to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed you to use it within the area. Therefore, some power you are given, which basically is considered within the area of what is called a taklif. Let's write that word down. Okay, let's write that word down in order for us to just recognize this area. Okay, a taklif. there are certain areas of taklif, meaning what? Certain areas that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you the power over. So the power over to probably get up and work, probably maybe determined to study or not to study, or whatever choices that you want to make. This is within the area of taklif, meaning within the area of accountability. Okay, the area of accountability would be that area that you're capable of choosing to do or not to do. This is the area of accountability. Okay, but whenever this area of accountability goes outside of your ability to control it, whether due to somebody coercing you to do certain things, or whether you had lost your mental capacity to understand, comprehend, and make the choice, then in that situation, you are not accountable. Okay, you wouldn't be held accountable if you were coerced due to ikrah. Okay, or probably due to perhaps sleep, you were asleep, or probably you were not yet reached the age of puberty. In other words, you didn't fully develop, your mental state is not fully developed, or perhaps someone let's say something affected your mental state. You weren't capable of having a fair judgment. Someone forced you to probably injected something in you, whatever it is, and you weren't capable of understanding what was going on and making the choices. Then in that situation, you are not held accountable, whether due to ikrah or whether due to the loss of mind and ability to think. Okay, so when you look at al-qahir, okay, we're specifically talking about the things that are not inside your taklif. Okay, the areas that are not inside your taklif. For example, maybe, hey, you got this illness and there's no way to control it. You got this illness, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-qahir. He's the one that overcomes your will. You thought that, hey, I'm going to go to school, etc., but then you got this brain cancer that affected your ability to think, affected your ability to remember, etc., all of these different things. Okay, al-qahir. Or you probably wanted to, I don't know, teach your kids, have these great kids, etc., but then one of your kids, or probably, God forbid, maybe got into a car accident, etc., but that wasn't what you had expected. It's outside of your area of taklif. Or perhaps you fell asleep and you didn't want to fall asleep, but when you fell asleep, you basically maybe lost your job as a result of you falling asleep. Or you probably have some kind of an illness that makes you not fully aware during work of what you're doing, etc. So if something is beyond your area of taklif, that would be qahir. Okay, but if something is within the area of what you are mukallaf in, what you're accountable in, then in that situation, you basically recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold you accountable. So we are musayyar and mukhayyar. What does that mean? We are basically, one, we are given the accountability, we are given the right to choose within certain parameters, but not necessarily in everything. Okay, so the areas that you have the ability to choose, that's basically the area of your free will. That's the area that you will be held accountable in. Okay, but the area that you don't have the free will to choose in making to do something or not do something, that's the area that you're not held accountable for, and therefore this is al-qahiru fawqa ibadihi. The Lord Almighty makes the choices, and some of those choices are definitely going against your will. So in that situation, you will either have sabr, You will either have patience, and when we speak about patience, it's basically within your will, you have the ability to control your emotions. How do I control my emotions? I channel them towards one, either not complaining, or I channel them towards perhaps enduring the different hardship by containing my emotions and trying to use those emotions to channel them towards probably finding different ways of success or different ways of ease or different ways of empowerment or whatever it is, but not use it, basically your anger or your sorrow or your pain, not use it to probably attack, harm, or probably complain, or probably go and lash out on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you're looking at al-Qahir, that moment when you would get those hardships, you would recognize that this is outside of your taklif, but you have one thing that you are held accountable for, which is learning how to contain your emotions from lashing out in ways that channel your emotions to bringing you basically further down in your situation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching us that no, it's nasr ma'a sabr. Victory comes with patience. In other words, just be patient. Don't let your feelings, don't let your emotions, don't let your anger, don't let your sorrow control your potentials, but you let your potentials basically climb over and beyond your sorrow, beyond your anger, beyond your emotions, in order to go much higher and go through empowerment. Ustaza Umayya, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, is it the same meaning of al-Qahir, same in Ayah 61? وهو القاهر فوق عباده ويرسل عليكم حفظة. Is that the
Absolutely.
same meaning?
Certainly, it's the same meaning, and that's the area we want to talk about, because when we say وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ, okay, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala يُرْسِلُ عَلَيْكُمْ حَفَظًا, that He would send basically the angels of death. So al-hafadha here are the angels of death, that they would basically come, and without your will being involved, He won't ask you for what you would want to choose, whether death, to stay alive, or death, but He's basically the one to overcome our will, to overcome our choices, and He would determine our decree without us basically having any say on that matter. So whether that's in death, or whether that's in sleep, or whether that's in perhaps different decrees, different qadar, that's basically qahir fawqa ibadihi. So there are certain areas that you don't have the power to choose, you don't have the power to decree. That's basically related to that area of qadar. There's other areas that you were given a taklif in other words, accountability in, the power to make the choice. Should I eat the apple or should I eat the orange? But I basically have an allergy to apples, and I ate the apple instead. You made the choice to eat the apple despite the fact that you knew that you had an allergy to apples, and you ate the apple. Now, do you have your EpiPen at hand? No, I don't. Okay, so what's going to be the result? Then you made the choice. So here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Qahir fawqa ibadi. Well, He controlled the world. He controlled how your body functions, whether your body is basically not equipped with the protein to digest, whether it's a certain thing in apples or whatever it is, and then you ended up getting sick. Okay, so وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ can also go in ways that He controls the world around us. Go ahead, Ustaza Umayya, you wanted to
So
say
can
something.
we say that the son of Adam is maqhoor by illness, by death, but something that out of his hand, right?
Okay, so
Prove
the
his
answer
weakness.
is no, because that was within the area of taklif. Remember this area,
Hmm.
okay? Prophet Adam alayhi salam, he was not controlled to eat from the apple because he was given the free will. Was he forced? No, he wasn't. Was he asleep? No, he wasn't. Did he reach the age of puberty? Yes, he did reach the age of puberty. So therefore, it was within the area of accountability, and it wasn't something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forced him to do. So that's why I'm using this word. Are we musayyar or mukhayyar? Are we given the choice to the free will to choose, or we somehow basically forced to do and take certain choices? So, you could say sometimes even atheists might say, well, you don't have free will, and therefore it's just matter that's controlling your choices. Well, what that is going to also mean, and the implication of that word, is that if we were to basically trial a criminal, we would just say, well, I mean, he didn't act with his free will because he basically has certain hormones that controlled his will because it's matter in motion, and this matter just grew strong in him and basically forced him to do this criminal act. And
So
then we're going to blame it on what? Are we going to blame it on the hormones? And this is something very common that we would see many people saying, well, it's a teenager, and therefore just accepting it. It's just a teenager that basically made the wrong choice. Am I supposed to be accepting the wrong choice? Or am I supposed to be putting in that discipline to teaching them how to make their area of potential, their area of accountability be channeled towards what is good? That's that taklif. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we basically read the word وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ, meaning the areas that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was not holding us accountable for, and the areas that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically beyond us, in the areas that we are not given the choice to choose.
yeah, with
But
the thanks,
areas
what
that
we are musayyarin, it means.
well, basically what the areas that we are mukhayyarin. In the areas that we're mukhayyarin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us that free space, that the areas that we're given free will, He's not qahir on you in that situation.
Right.
You chose to make that choice. But He is qahir on the areas that you have no power of,
Right.
whether it's death, whether it's probably, hey,
This
you can't say, I don't want to sleep.
this
Your
is what I
body
want to
will
reach you.
basically,
Yeah.
your body will basically overcome you and say, but no, I'm gonna sleep.
Yeah, Jazakallah.
There are certain areas that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically took away your free will, and you would have no power to control, to do or not do. For example, like we had said, sleep, death, or probably, that's why people wanted to commit suicide. Wouldn't it just be easier just be in place and just hold your breath and that's it until you die? But they won't be capable of doing that. So what would they do? They would jump off a cliff, or probably shoot themselves, or probably eat something, and then that way they wouldn't have the ability to go back. Okay, in other words, they're trying to fight their own will because they would not be capable. Their body would not submit to their will if they were wanting to probably just hold their breath till they die. Their body would not accept it. Their body would not submit to it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made your body not submit to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had qahar ibadah in it, to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had overcome you in, which is, for example, in this situation, death. You would not be capable of overcoming Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree. So when we look at suicide, for example, why is it a sin? Because it's battling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree in giving you life, and decreeing death. And you did not embrace the ni'mah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you, the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you. So, فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ, and when you look at al-Qahir, yes, certainly, al-Qahir basically means the one to overcome, and al-Qahr is also to let the person live in some form of submission, okay? And dhillah. And fawqa is actually adding on to that meaning, because when you say fawqa, it basically lets you feel under. Okay, when you say fawqa ibadihi, what is that inferring? That I'm under. And it's also saying ibad. Al-ibad, al-abd, is supposed to be a servant. So if it's calling me right there, let's flip that. So let's flip the wording of this. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond and overcoming the servants, that would actually also contain the meaning that we are one, submissive, in submission, under, and with ibadihi, we are simply Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are, because we're here, you know, we're flipping and bringing in the inference of what does that make us. Okay, we are under Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are lower, if we were going to use the metaphorical one. We are in submission. We are in that dhillah and humility. We are basically all under. That's the opposite of al-abd is going to be al-rabb, is going to be the master. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know who we really are in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are slaves in submission to the master, to the Lord Almighty, and He is beyond us, He is above us, and we are under Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's control, and He is basically the master controlling everything that is beyond us. So just, of course, just putting that within the context. وَهُوَ الْحَكِيمُ الْخَبِيرُ. What is al-Hakim? And why within this context? Al-Hakim. Al-Hakim basically means the one that is most wise. When we say the one that is most wise, meaning what? Just letting us know that certainly the Lord Almighty is in control of all our matters, but on good terms. Because when you talk about al-hikmah, you're talking about making the decisions not in a way that is just impulsive. It's not an impulsive decision making. It's not an impulsive type of control, but it's actually based on wisdom. Wisdom is to also give the inference that it's based on good terms. It's based on good reasons. It's based on good results. And it's not based on an impulsive retaliation, that it's basically just to bring about some kind of an emotional reaction to things. So when we look at وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ, this is to basically emphasize that it's never going to be in qahr to just cause harm. Because the word qahr can sometimes carry the connotation within it that it's just to make you feel helpless and hopeless. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that's why He's annexing Al-Hakim, Al-Khabir, to let us understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not an impulsive Lord and wanting to be in control just to basically retaliate in anger or retaliate in ways that is just based on impulsive reaction. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, al-Hakim al-Khabir. It's with certain knowledge, it's based on knowledge, it's based on wisdom, it's based on making the good consequences and the good results, and basically coming in from the stance that it is all coming from what is good. For the Lord Almighty is not an evil Lord, but the Lord Almighty is Al-Hakim, is a wise Lord, is an all-knowing Lord, and therefore, what can I embrace in this situation? قُلْ أَيُّ شَيْءٍ أَكْبَرُ شَهَادَةً. Ask them, what's the best witness? How do I know? How do I know that the Lord Almighty is not a Lord that is impulsive, is not a Lord that is an evil Lord? How do I know? أَيُّ شَيْءٍ أَكْبَرُ شَهَادَةً. All you need to say, you need witnesses. قُلِ اللَّهُ شَهِيدٌ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the witness between you and I. وَأُوحِيَ إِلَيَّ هَذَا الْقُرْآنُ لِأُنذِرَكُمْ بِهِ وَمَنْ بَلَغَ. The most important thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed onto me is basically this Quran as a word of the Lord Almighty in order to warn you and warn those that had received the message. Warn them of what? Warn them to let them know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Qahir, that the Lord Almighty had predetermined the purpose for existence, predetermined a lot of the endings that you live in, whether the ending of your rizq, or whether the ending of your provision, or the ending of your life, or probably the ending that this life will basically unfold into in Yawm al-Qiyamah. So therefore, how do I know that this is all coming in as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Qahir fawqa ibadihi? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the message with basically al-Wahi, with Jibreel alayhi salam, in order to give you the warning, because the Lord Almighty is al-Hakim, al-Khabir, and He is beyond all. So therefore, He is the one that had predetermined the purpose that preceded your existence. And therefore, for you to know that the Lord Almighty had His hikmah, had His wisdom to why He founded and why He created the universe and why He created life in the beginning. So therefore, all you recognize is that you have no choice but to submit that this life was created and that I am being tested, and that this Quran is basically coming in to give you that determination that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already done and decreed. You, on the other hand, would recognize that you have no choice of rejecting the determination that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had done. Just as you have no choice in probably choosing to reject or probably refuse death, or probably refuse sleep, or probably refuse maybe wanting, you probably want to force yourself to probably moving your body and mobilizing your body in certain ways. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you limited potentials, limited areas to basically do specific orders that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had held you accountable for. So just as your potentials are limited, your area of knowledge about this world is limited, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically giving you some of that information that your limitations are not capable of navigating, are not capable of knowing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Hakim, is al-Khabir. He basically has that piece of information that you're not capable of navigating. So because your intellect is limited to know behind the determination that basically exceeded your ability to navigate beyond world, beyond time, beyond place, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically saying right there, قُلْ أَيُّ شَيْءٍ أَكْبَرُ شَهَادَةً. What bigger witness do you want? For the Lord Almighty is the witness between me and you. You can reject the Quran. You can reject the evidence. You can reject all this universe that's speaking of one thing, that there is a reason and a purpose why this whole world was created. And that you don't control every decree, you don't control all your matters, just like you didn't control to bring yourself to life, you won't control to bring yourself to death. So therefore, I'm basically letting you know, أوحي إلي هذا القرآن, basically letting you know that this Quran was revealed onto me to bring one thing to you, which is to letting you know that there is a warning, that this life was not created for mere entertainment, but it was created for a reason. And who is it for? وَمَنْ بَلَغ. Whether وَمَنْ بَلَغ, whoever had received the information, that they would basically be held accountable, or وَمَنْ بَلَغ, meaning that they reached the age of puberty. In other words, the area of accountability, they would recognize it, and they would be basically accountable for what choices that they would make. Accountability, whether with mental capacity there, or whether we're speaking about physical development and mental development. And therefore, if that person بلغته الرسالة, they got the message, they basically received the Quran, and they are aware of it. أَإِنَّكُمْ لَتَشْهَدُونَ أَنَّ مَعَ اللَّهِ آلِهَةً أُخْرَى. Do you witness that there's another Lord other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Well, قُلْ لَا أَشْهَدُ, if that's what they would witness. Now, this, أَإِنَّكُمْ لَتَشْهَدُونَ أَنَّ مَعَ اللَّهِ آلِهَةً أُخْرَى, are you witnessing? This isn't a question here. So this isn't giving some kind of an inquiry, but this is actually kashifa. This is telling them, well, now you're being exposed, you're associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and قُلْ لَا أَشْهَدُ, with your voice, with your pride, with an answer that contains all the commitment and certainly all the steadfastness, with no hesitation, say, I do not witness such blasphemy, such a false claim, which is that there's another Lord other than the Lord Almighty. قُلْ إِنَّمَا هُوَ إِلَهُ وَاحِدٌ وَإِنَّنِي بَرِيءٌ مِّمَّا تُشْرِكُونَ. Say that there's only one Lord worthy of worship, and I am innocent of what you would claim in associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How are we going to basically bring about the evidences to this? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you look at أكبر شهادة, أي شيء أكبر شهادة, قل الله شهيد بيني وبينكم. Say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best witness. In other words, well, how do I recognize where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is? Well, all you need to do is just look around you in order to see. One, الكتاب المسطور is basically the Quran. There's الكتاب المفتوح and there's the الكتاب المسطور. Let's look into those. Let's look into these two words, okay? So there are two books. There's the book, basically the open book, and that's that open book we're speaking about the universe. For us to really witness that the Lord Almighty is basically speaking in his magnificence, to basically let it be apparent to all of us to see. Let it be apparent for all of us to observe, for all of us to recognize. Recognize what? Recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-qahiru fawqa ibadah, that he's basically the one to control, to determine beyond his servants. And there is the written book. What is the written book? The written book is basically considered al-wahi. Al-wahi meaning what was revealed onto the prophets and the messengers. And that's why this ayah was basically saying, وَأُوحِيَ إِلَيَّ هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ. So it basically gave us two things. وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ. That's basically that open book for us to recognize that there is something that is controlling the universe, whether controlling it to start, that determined for it to start. In other words, the idea, the design that basically preceded the existence, and therefore we would recognize that the whole the whole foundation of the universe, just like as when we would simplify it, what comes first? The making of the eye or the idea of sight? The making of the ear or the idea of hearing? So the idea of sight and being able to observe is what basically determined how and what the engineering of making an eye was going to look like in order to come to basically the result of being able to see. Same thing. When we're speaking about the making of the ear and the way that it was made is basically to come to the function and to get to the result of being able to hear. If we're speaking about sight, we're speaking about hearing, we're speaking about all these different designs that basically surround us in every single corner, that's basically saying we're speaking about life, that the reason for life preceded the making of life, and that's al-qahr. The reason for life basically was determined by the Lord Almighty, Al-Hakim, Al-Khabir. Well, not only the start of life, but also the end of life. That's the open book for us to observe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Qahir fawqa ibadihi. Therefore, He had predetermined. Therefore, He makes that determination. Now, as for you, you would basically not be capable of recognizing, well, who and what is behind this universe, what controls this whole world. Why are we capable of getting through certain things but not having all the complete limitation or the complete powers, but we're actually confined within certain limitations? Such limitations would basically give us a limit to recognizing and searching and probably navigating the answers. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us al-kitab al-maqru', the written book, basically the recited book, which is Al-Quran. Ustaza Umayya, you wanted to say something, dear.
حبيبي is it the same about the الكتاب المفتوح as Nabilsi said that الكون هو قرآن مفتوح؟
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm thinking.
جزاك الله خير.
Absolutely. The whole universe, whether we're speaking about physics or whether we're speaking about biology or whether we're speaking about math, we're speaking about all these different laws that we would see in this world. That's the law, that's al-qahr. That's the law that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically controlled, and we have no power to changing the law. We have no power to changing the law, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala held us accountable in what we're capable of basically having the free will to apply within a certain area that basically is a limited area of what choices you would make. Maybe marriage, maybe getting a job, maybe eating this or eating that, etc. Gave us very limited powers to make choices in certain things, and those are the powers that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically tested us in. الَّذِينَ آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابَ يَعْرِفُونَهُ كَمَا يَعْرِفُونَ أَبْنَاءَهُمْ الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ فَهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Those that were given the book. Is this talking about those that were given the book? Is this talking about the people of the book, meaning the Jews and the Christians? Majority of the scholars said yes. This is talking about the Jews and the Christians that basically they recognize that there was a prophecy about the Prophet ﷺ. يعرفونه. They would know the Prophet ﷺ. They knew about the Prophet ﷺ. There was a prophecy about the Prophet ﷺ that he was a coming prophet, and that these are the signs. These are basically the signs that whether it's before him coming, whether it's in Medina, just like Salman al-Farisi, and how those monks were telling him that he was going to be coming from a certain certain area in basically al-Hijaz, basically in that area, and how he would not accept a donation, but would accept a gift, or how he would have a specific birthmark on his neck, and how he was basically coming in with a certain message, etc. All of that. Well, they were having the prophecy. How was that prophecy basically transmitted, whether it's through scholars or whether through scriptures, whether through different traditions that were basically given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and later probably some of it was noted, some of it was not noted. And certainly at the time, the religious teachings were not always documented. And many times it was more done through oral transmission. So that's what you would say, well, some of it was basically transmitted orally from a scholar to a scholar, rabbi to a rabbi, or priest to a priest, or monk to a monk, and then passed it on basically to the other generations. So they would know some of those prophecies that were foretold, whether orally, or some of those prophecies were basically also noted down, just as we would see in perhaps in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 18, and Isaiah chapter 39. I forgot I think it was chapter 39. I think, if I'm not mistaken, perhaps verse 20 or something. I forgot exactly which verse it was, and certainly in other chapters as well, giving us different signs of the coming prophet, or a coming prophet basically to continue the message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent onto Prophet Isa alayhi salam, or Prophet Musa alayhi salam, etc. So whether we're going to look at those chapters, or whether we're seeing other evidences in probably other scriptures telling us of coming prophets, and telling us about the evidences and the prophecies that were mentioned in other scriptures, that at the end, كَمَا يَعْرِفُونَ أَبْنَاءَهُم, they would know exactly the way that they would know their children. Because how would you know? How does the parent know their child? A parent knows their child because they would know their motive. What are they after? Why are they doing this? So what's the motive? What's the intention from, asking to probably get a phone? What do they really want to do on their phone? And why do they want a phone, etc. So that you would know the intention, because you had been observing your child since they were young. You had been observing them. You were always watching their behaviors, and you were capable of seeing a pattern in where they're heading. And that's the same thing. That these rabbis, or these scholars, or these monks or priests, or they had the ilm to read basically through scripture, or transmitted information about the prophecies about the coming prophet. But then, even though they had known the different prophecies exactly the way they would know their children, but they still insisted to reject the prophecies, and still insisted to not want to embrace the evidences, embrace the truth. الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُم. And from those, basically, that had lost themselves. Wait a minute. So what does it mean that they had lost themselves? Well, how do you lose yourself? You would lose the opportunity that you were given. You would not make use of that opportunity that you were given. You recognized you had the ilm, and you recognized the truth, and you recognized that there was an ability to embrace the truth and perhaps guarantee a place in Jannah. But they didn't want that. Some did not want that. Not all. الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ فَهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. The ones that had lost themselves, in other words, did not make use of that opportunity, are the ones basically that did not believe. Well, so why did it say الَّذِينَ لَمْ يُؤْمِنُوا خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُم? الَّذِينَ, the ones that didn't believe, are the ones that lost them, lost themselves or lost their opportunities. In other words, why not say that? الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُم. That's basically to let us know and just think of the loss. And then let us know, well, what affected? Why did they get into loss then? Well, that's because they chose not to be amongst the ones that had believed. They didn't want to embrace the facts that were coming at them. So what did they want to embrace? They wanted to think that by rejecting truth, that they were going to basically be the ones to force the truth to bend to their desire. But that wasn't going to be something that was ever going to happen. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Qahir. He had determined truth. He had predetermined truth. Then you would have no choice but to find truth and not make truth. And this is important because the culture today that we are living in the modern culture, it's always about, hey, I had basically discovered my own potential and I had discovered and this is what I recognized about myself and etc. It's trying to somehow think that it's discovering their own or making a certain potential, not discovering or knowing. It's creating your own self. And in the era of postmodernism, meaning the era where there is no truth, but one truth, that there is no truth. And therefore, since this is founded on the whole ideology that this world was created in absurdity, and that's why we're right now just living in this nihilism, just basically for the nothingness. Just you create your own self. So when you would see younger generations, for example, piercing and dressing in these weird ways, what would they tell you? They would tell you, I'm basically expressing myself. So what is yourself that you're trying to express? It's confusion. It's that there's no reason. And they're making up reasons. They'll make up these different things. But it's not to make up. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Qahir. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had predetermined the reason for existence before you had even existed. So therefore, you have to navigate basically two things. You would navigate the world in order to recognize that there's a pattern that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had predetermined with His wisdom, with His knowledge before you were even created, and even had controlled the limitations that you basically had, and certainly the ending, and at the same time had the open book that He had sent basically in order to warn people of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was taking this world into. Inshallah, we will be continuing, inshallah, tomorrow, but I actually have to go for my daughter's event, so I'll end right here. إن شاء الله قل إنما هو إله واحد وإنني بريء مما تشركون. Inshallah, we'll continue. الذين آتيناهم الكتاب يعرفونه كما يعرفون أبنائهم الذين خسروا أنفسهم فهم لا يؤمنون. So inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow and with Tafseer al-Qurtubi. So stay tuned. I know we wanted to do Hisn al-Muslim, but I have to be there for my daughter, inshallah. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. If there is a last question, let's inshallah, give the space, inshallah, to answer the questions.
I will not be selfish. Go to your daughter, please.
I'll go, inshallah. I'll go to my daughter.
جزاك الله
So,
خيرا.
inshallah, subhanakallah wa bihamdik nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta.